So for the past couple of years, I've gone to this conference in New York called Believers in Business. And this is a conference that is organized by mostly Ivy League MBA students. So there's a big group from Harvard there every year. Yale's got a big group, Wharton School at Penn, Stanford, MIT. So these are the future CEOs of America are coming into to this program. But of course, they don't get any interaction of faith and business in their curriculum. So they have to come away for a weekend, and they invite in some of the real A-lister business leaders from Wall Street or CEOs of corporations to talk about how faith interacts with business, which we find sort of interesting. I've said before, when I'm at this conference, I've never felt so smart and so dumb at the same time. So here I'm in the presence of these really brilliant people, but they're asking questions about faith and business that we handle all the time. This is just what we do. And so for example, they had two senior partners from Goldman Sachs on Wall Street come in and talk about servant leadership. And so they talked about what Jesus modeled. They talked about Robert Greenleaf, which I'll talk a little bit more about in a second, sort of the modern father of servant leadership. And so they do this presentation, and they open it for questions. And there was a guy from Harvard that I've been talking to a little earlier, and he raises his hand and he goes, "Okay, great theory, sounds nice, but I'm going to be like sea level. Aren't I going to get walked all over? Am I not going to be a doormat with this servant leadership idea? This is not going to work, is it?" And so the partners from Goldman Sachs seemed a little stumped about this question. And they finally said, and I'll paraphrase, but they finally said something to the effect of, "Well, it worked for Jesus, so it'll work for you." That is a less than satisfying answer. And so, I want to pause on that question for just a second and talk a little bit about some of the background and where we've come from with some of these leadership styles that focus on humility of the leader and service. So I mentioned Robert Greenleaf. So he's the father of the modern servant leadership model. He wrote an article in 1970 and then this book in 1977 are sort of the seminal works on servant leadership. And he really brought forth this idea of what the servant looks like. So he says the servant leader is servant first. It begins with the natural feeling that one wants to serve first. Then conscious choice brings one to aspire to lead. And then there's another quote he has on the next page that I find really interesting. He says, "The best test, and difficult to administer, is, do those served grow as persons? Do they, while being served, become healthier, wiser, freer, more autonomous, more likely themselves to become servants? And what is the effect on the least privileged in society? Will they benefit or at least not be further deprived?" And so that's that test of servant leadership. So then if you haven't read the book, or you can Google and read the article, it's really fascinating how he talks about the focus is on your followers. And how do you make your followers successful? I worked with a business leader as an owner of a company. And on his business card, instead of saying CEO, it said CHRO. And I said, "Okay, you've got my curiosity. What's CHRO?" He goes, "Chief Hurdle Removing Officer." Okay, that perfectly describes the servant leader. The servant leader is, I'm going to remove all the hurdles for my people and make sure that they are successful. And so this is this idea of servant leadership, and it has really been catching on in corporate America. And so, for example, Southwest Airlines. Southwest was probably the first company that publicly came out and espoused, "We are running our company on a servant leadership model." This was around 1980, so it was about 3 years after Greenleaf published his book on it. Herb Callagher at Southwest said, this is the way we're going to model our company, and publicly said that. So they've been running that, and of course they have outperformed every airline by huge, massive amounts over the past 30 years or so. Chick-fil-A, you probably would not be surprised. Chick-fil-A is one of the most active today in actually sponsoring conferences and supporting and publishing pieces on servant leadership. Their former CEO, under Truett Cathy, president, Jimmy Collins, published a book on followership. And he talked about being the number 2 guy and how you be the number 2 behind Truett Cathy within the organization, but he factored in a lot of the servant leadership, and it's just part of the culture. So you got sort of a Chick-fil-A cup right there. There you go. So anyway, a couple others. Marriott. Marriott has adopted that philosophy. The Darden restaurants. So you may never have heard of Darden, but you know their restaurants that you've been to. And Zappos. Any ladies particularly buy shoes from Zappos? They've built a model. You're going to pay list price, but you're going to love them for it. So Zappos is one that espouses that servant leadership model. And so what's really funny, though, is when you look at this concept of servant leadership and you see it in the press, this is this new hot idea. You know, never before seen before. This is revolutionary in the business world. And you sort of sit back and wonder, you know, does some of this sound familiar? And so one of the things that Christians have really adopted this idea is because it matches up with the teachings that we follow. So, just off the top of your head, what are some examples? Servant leadership. How did Jesus model servant leadership?
Foot washing.
Foot washing. What else? Or teach it, not necessarily model. Foot washing is the great example of actual modeling it. So teaching. What else did he say about greatness and leadership?
First should be last and last should be first.
Very good. What else?
Do unto the least of these.
Doing the least. Yeah. So we have just lots of examples that we can look at the teachings of Christ and say, this servant leadership model that is being successful in places like Southwest and Chick-fil-A, this is not new, and it's consistent. But sometimes we sort of get this image of Jesus as this servant, and we get this really weak-looking image in our mind. Well, if Jesus was the servant, then surely he was the doormat and was walked all over. He would be today if he was here. And you get sort of this kind of weak-looking image. But you think, okay, so servant leadership has to be more than just that, right? And so you also think of how Jesus modeled what he did. And you think, you know, Jesus was not always this mild, meek, you know, he had an intensity and a focus on what he was doing and what his mission was. And he was not afraid to confront whoever, the most powerful people in the country. He was not afraid to get in their face. He was not afraid to do whatever it took to be successful in that model and to do whatever it took to complete the mission. And so as I think about that aspect, that somewhat goes a little beyond servant leadership, it seems to me. And so I've been fascinated with Good to Great, Level 5 leadership. How many of y'all are familiar with Level 5 leadership? Okay, a few. So Collins wrote this book, Good to Great. It's the second best-selling business book of this millennium. So millions of copies sold all over the world, very popular, mostly popular for one chapter. Probably the best known, in fact, Collins is the best known, or the most published business writer of our generation when you combine all of his books together. Mostly known for one chapter. And that's on this idea of level 5 leadership. And what was really interesting is, he said a level 5 leader, and okay, quick backstory. He surveyed every American corporation for the past 100 years, and he said, is it possible for a company to go from good to great and stay there? I mean, sometimes a company will make a blip, and he was using stock price as the scorecard. So he's got an objective measure. If the stock price goes up, then they're doing something right. They're being successful. And so he said, is it possible to go from good to great and stay there? And so he looked at the stock prices of all the corporations, 1,300 corporations in the past 100 years or so, and he found that there were 11 companies that went from good to great. And it just happened, one of them was Kimberly-Clark, and I was working at Kimberly-Clark at the time, so that was required reading for all of us. But anyway, so he says these 11 companies, and what do they have in common? And he said they had a unique leadership style, all 11 of them. And when he compared them to 11 similar companies in same industries and that type of thing, the leadership style was different between the two groups. And they couldn't quite figure out what to do with it or what to call it. But they said in these successful, great companies, the leaders had this paradoxical blend of humility and professional will. So they were personally humble guys, but they were intense. My favorite quote was, he said, they had an absolute, obsessed, burning, compulsive ambition that was not about them. It was about the organization. It was about the cause. And that ambition made them successful. And their humility factored into that, made sure that they built up leaders around them, that they listened to input from the people that they hired. They hired good people. And so it's that paradoxical blend that made it really unique. Now, I got really fascinated with this, not just because I worked at Kimberly-Clark, but having grown up on this campus, I didn't realize that's not normal. Okay, and I'll show you the picture of the 5 guys that I grew up watching. Okay, so you got Ben Lutz, Dad, Jack Lau, Rick Beam, David Eubanks. David Eubanks is just the epitome of level 5. We interviewed him. Our first MBA cohort interviewed David Eubanks. And man, he was just straight every description that Jim Collins would give about what a level 5 leadership. It was David Eubanks. And then he hired the men. And you know, the shortest tenure of any of those guys was about 25 years here. I mean, so to build a leadership team like that is just phenomenal. And every one of those guys are level 5 leaders. And so, like I said, when I was growing up, that was normal. And it wasn't until I got away and moved away and started working in Fortune 500 companies that I realized that not all leaders are like that. And so that's actually what I wrote my dissertation on, was level 5 leaders and evaluating. One of the really interesting little trivia points that I think is really interesting about this picture, you realize all 5 of those are now retired, but they all 5 have children working for Johnson today. So you got Carrie Beth Lau, you got me, you got Ben Lutz, Derek Beam, and Philip Eubanks are still working for the college. So again, that sort of shows the level 5 leadership, because you develop the leaders around you and you instill the ethics, the ethos of what you do into the people around you. So I find that just fascinating that we're all there. So then there was an interesting quote that said that servant leaders and level 5 leaders are not antithetical. In fact, they may be the same people. And so one of the things that I've done in some of my research is evaluate, is level 5 leadership and servant leadership the same thing? And what I found, they're 2 different constructs. In other words, basically a level 5 leader is focused on the organization. And they're going to do whatever it takes to make the organization a success. If their followers happen to benefit, that's great. If not, the organization is going to be successful. Servant leaderships are more focused on the followers and serving the followers. What the research tends to show, though, is they're really one and the same. If somebody has that much of a focus and a direction for the organization, they know they've got to take care of their followers. They know they're going to serve. And again, it's not about them. It's about others being successful. So, getting back to my original question, does it work? So, I was sitting in New York listening to these Goldman Sachs partners sputter about, I don't know, we work for Jesus, okay. So I'm getting on my phone and Googling, okay, what research is out there? And I found there's nothing out there. Nobody's ever actually asked the question, did it work? So I did a study and presented a paper at the International Leadership Association conference in November about, does it work? And so, I'll tell you what, I'm going to skip that because I already talked about it. So the research questions I had in my paper, is there a statistically significant relationship between leadership type and the follower's perception of boss's performance results? Which leadership type is the best predictor of results? And is there a strong correlation? I also looked at transformational leadership. I haven't talked about that this morning, but that's really transformational leadership is the most researched leadership type out there. Is a leader transformational or transactional or passive? And so anyway, for today I skipped over that, but that was part of the study. And the results showed for level 5 leaders, very successful. So is that 89%? 89% of employees would say that if their boss was level 5 leader, they were successful. If they were not level 5, they were less likely to be successful. And there's statistical work behind that shows that is statistically significant, and that is a real result. So level 5 leaders produce higher results. And if you look at by leadership type, and I looked again, looking statistically, and without getting into the numbers, servant leadership was actually the highest correlation to success, to the boss's success. If they were a servant leader, their employees were more likely to think they were successful than any other type. But all of those, level 5, transformational, and servant leadership, all three of those leadership types were positively correlated to success. So the idea that the leader, it's not about them, it's about serving either the organization, their followers, that's what brings success. The egotistical leaders that are focused on themselves, less successful than the ones that are focused on others.